In 1966, a 13-year-old boy was picked up by police for peacefully picketing the courthouse in Hattiesburg in South Mississippi. Years later, he remembers how he shook at their threats.
And the only thing on my mind at that time as I walked down this long corridor in this police station, I'm listening for the sound of barking dogs. I thought literally that we were going to be fed to the dogs. I need to know where are the dogs just in case they come after me. I need to know where the exit, how am I going to defend myself, how am I going to take care of myself when these dogs come after me.
Anthony J. Harris is a lecturer, former professor at Sam Houston State University, and author of 9 books.
It made sense for Anthony Harris to become an activist, for he was not only courageous, but his mother was local civil rights leader Daisy Harris Wade.
My late mother, I call her an icon. She was a warrior in the civil rights movement in Hattiesburg.
Daisy Harris Wade led freedom marches in Hattiesburg. In 1964, the freedom marches were taking place across Mississippi. African American demonstrators, joined by clergy and activists from the North, demanded voting rights.
She was probably in her mid-20s or 30s, I imagine at that time. She was actively involved in demonstrations and marches and mass meetings, and whenever she went to a meeting, whenever she went to a demonstration, she always took her 3 boys with her. And we have so many pictures of us sitting with our mom at these meetings, and she was a small woman in stature, but she had a commanding presence.
1964 was the Freedom Summer. Civil rights organizations recruited more than 1,000 volunteers to travel to Mississippi. With local activists, they canvassed the neighborhoods of towns like Hattiesburg to help register black voters. African Americans made up 40% of the state, but because of Jim Crow laws, less than 7% could vote. The Daisy Harris Wade family was among those brave families who took the outsiders into their homes. Some of the volunteers also taught at freedom schools, offering history, the arts, and other classes that weren't available to African American children. At one point, young Anthony Harris happened to learn from folk music legend Pete Seeger, who was a freedom school volunteer.
These were hopeful times and dangerous times. Medgar Evers and other activists were murdered in towns nearby. In January 1966, the Ku Klux Klan firebombed the home of Hattiesburg businessman Vernon Damer. Damer fought off his attackers long enough for his family to escape, but died from his wounds the next day. Across town in that same month, Anthony Harris, his brother, and a friend determined to march outside the courthouse. It wasn't long before a squad pulled a U-turn, and officers hustled the boys into the car.
We were just scared to death. We're young kids here. We're probably 10, 11 years old, maybe 12 years old. And as they sped off, taking us to the police station, presumably, the officer in the passenger side picked up his 2-way radio and he said, "Headquarters, have the dogs been fed today?" "Well, they haven't." "Well, we're bringing in fresh meat for them." And I'm thinking, okay, we're going to be fed to the police dogs. They were talking about us. And we got us to the police station, and we were shivering. We were cold. We were cold, shaking from the cold and from the fear. At any rate, they took us into this interrogation room, and there were chairs in the room, but they would not allow us to sit in those chairs. We had to sit on the floor. And as we were sitting there, one of the officers kept trying to intimidate us. I use the term terrorizing us, because he pulled out of his back pocket a blackjack, which is a weapon that police use to subdue people they're trying to arrest. And it's a small piece of lead wrapped in black leather, and as he was walking toward us, he was tossing that blackjack from hand to hand in a very threatening, menacing way. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, we've managed to not get eaten by the dogs. Now this man is going to beat us to death in this room. And about that time, the door to this interrogation room opens up, this loud bang, bam. In walks this small, petite black woman who is yelling and screaming and telling these officers, "Let these boys go. You have no right to hold them. I mean, you let them go right now." And that was my mom. That was Daisy Harris coming to the rescue. And I had never been happier to see my mother as I was when she walked into that room. And after a while, I think the officers responded to my mom the way we did when she raised her voice, and that is, you better do what she says. This woman is serious here. So after a while, they let us go. But that was just an example of her courage, an example of her willingness to make sacrifices for the sake of justice and the sake of her children.
The Freedom Summer culminated in the formation of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. At the Democratic Convention that year, they challenged the right of the all-white delegation to represent a state that was 40% black. The highlight was the fiery testimony of another Mississippian, Fannie Lou Hamer, a sharecropper turned activist. She described the beatings and terror that she and others endured, simply trying to vote. Hamer and her party were not seated at the convention, but the next year President Lyndon Johnson signed into law the Civil Rights Act that extended and protected the vote for decades afterward. International Women's Day was this week, recognizing the contributions of women. Also this week, Republican lawmakers have introduced more than 250 bills in 43 states, including Texas, aimed at restricting voting access, according to author Ari Berman. Now is a good time to remember Daisy Harris Wade and Fannie Lou Hamer. You can find Anthony J. Harris's books and his podcast, Looking Back, Moving Forward, at anthonyjharris.com. For the People's News, this is John Moeller reporting.